The newsroom was buzzing when the headline hit every screen. Supreme Court rules against state-level data collection. Phones rang, reporters shouted, and somewhere in the middle of the chaos, Fani Willis stood frozen. She wasn't shouting or slamming her desk like the news clips would later suggest. No. She was just standing still, watching the world she'd built start to crack. For months, Fani had worked on a project that gave her office access to public and commercial data. Banking trends, online transactions, even open social media posts, to track organized financial crimes. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. The results were starting to show. And now, in one unexpected moment, the Supreme Court had called it unconstitutional. Across the city, in a quiet coffee shop with the TV flickering above the counter, two friends from college, David and Carla, watched the same headline roll in. David was a data analyst, always logical, always calm. Carla was a civil rights attorney, thoughtful, sharp, and never afraid to question power. "You see," David said, stirring his coffee, "this is what happens when the courts go too far. They don't understand how modern crime works. You take away the tools, and you tie the hands of people like Fani." Carla didn't even look up from her mug. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "they just drew a line. Someone has to. You can't collect personal data from millions of people and call it safety." David sighed. It wasn't personal. It was patterns, numbers, not names. Carla met his eyes. "That's what everyone says until the numbers start pointing at real people." The conversation might have ended there, but the TV kept rolling with commentary. Some experts calling it a victory for privacy, others calling it a disaster for law enforcement. Every network had their spin, every voice their certainty. The nation was split before the hour was over. Meanwhile, Fani's office felt like it had been hit by a storm. Her team, usually full of chatter and energy, worked in tense silence. Screens blinked with unfinished reports, frozen in time. Fani stepped into the briefing room, holding a folder that now meant nothing. "We followed the rules," she said to her deputy. "We asked for permission. We went through the right channels." Her deputy looked uneasy. "The court says it's about scope. They think the state shouldn't have that kind of reach." Fani nodded, but her expression didn't change. She had spent her career believing that justice meant moving fast. Faster than the criminals. Faster than the damage they caused. But now she was being told that speed itself might be the problem. Outside, the city kept moving. People were too busy to care about legal definitions or court opinions. But online, the debate was already burning. Hashtags, videos, think pieces, everyone had an opinion. Was the government protecting people or watching them? David scrolled through the comments section, shaking his head. "It's amazing," he said to Carla. "People scream about privacy, but they give away their data every day to apps, to stores, to anyone offering a discount." Carla didn't argue. "That's true," she admitted. "But there's a difference between choosing to share and being watched without knowing it." David leaned back. "And there's a difference between protecting privacy and letting criminals slip through the cracks." The barista turned up the volume as a reporter summarized the court's opinion. State-level data systems can't collect, store, or cross-reference personal digital data without explicit individual consent, even for investigative purposes. David muttered. "That's it. They just shut down half the state's ability to predict fraud." Carla said softly. "They just stopped the state from crossing into private life." Both were right in their own way, and both knew it, but neither could convince the other. Back at the prosecutor's office, Fani sat alone in her office, papers spread across her desk. She'd built her reputation on results. Real cases solved through hard work and smart systems. She believed in rules, yes, but she also believed in innovation. When she started the data project, she saw it as a modern extension of detective work, gathering clues from digital footprints instead of street corners. Now, with one ruling, the court had said that even digital footprints had limits. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the messages flooding in, reporters asking for statements, colleagues offering sympathy, critics celebrating the decision. She ignored them all and opened her notebook instead. On the first page, she'd written one line months ago. "Protecting people is worth every fight." She stared at it for a long time. At the same time, across town, Carla was walking home under the glow of streetlights. Her phone buzzed too. Other attorneys, journalists, friends texting her thoughts about the ruling. Some called it a landmark decision. Others said it was a step backward. Carla just replied to one message. "It's complicated." For her, the case wasn't just about law. It was about human nature. The endless push and pull between safety and freedom. Between wanting protection and fearing control. She knew the issue wasn't black and white, but she also knew that once you give away too much privacy, you rarely get it back. David, still at the cafe, watched as the breaking news segment replayed the footage of Fani standing in front of the TV. The commentator said she had lost it, but David could see the truth. She hadn't lost her temper. She'd lost something more subtle: trust in the system she'd believed in. He closed his laptop and stared out the window. He didn't agree with the ruling, but he couldn't shake Carla's words either. Maybe both sides were right. Maybe that was the real problem. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of how much had changed in one day. Most people wouldn't feel the effects immediately, but somewhere, the balance between safety and privacy had shifted, just slightly, and everyone would feel it eventually. In homes, offices, and courtrooms, people were already arguing about it. Some said this was the beginning of a safer digital future. Others said it was the end of practical law enforcement. But for now, there were no winners, no villains. Just people trying to understand a new line drawn in invisible ink. And at the center of it all, Fani Willis sat in her quiet office, watching the city lights blink like data points on a map. Signals from lives she could no longer trace. She wasn't angry anymore. She was thinking. Because sometimes losing isn't the end. Sometimes it's the moment before something better is built. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Inside, Fani closed her notebook, stood, and walked to the window. For the first time in years, she didn't know what came next, but she knew this much. The story wasn't over. Not for her, not for the law, and not for the people caught between privacy and protection. The night after the Supreme Court ruling, the mood in Fani Willis's office was heavy. The blinds were half closed, the screens dimmed, and the usual energy that filled the room had drained away. Fani stood at the end of the long conference table. Her team gathered around her. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of explaining why something built to protect people was now being painted as a threat. "We were careful," she said quietly. "We didn't spy on anyone. We looked for patterns, not people." But her words didn't change the reality. The court had spoken. The program was suspended. That night, she sat alone in her office, staring at the city through the glass. The data network she'd built had been her pride. A tool that linked public records, financial reports, and digital activity to predict and prevent crimes before they spread. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. A few months earlier, her team had stopped a massive fraud ring before it hit hundreds of families. Now, without access to data, that kind of prevention was impossible. She flipped through her files and saw faces of victims. People who'd been protected because her program caught something others missed. Now she wondered what would happen to them next time. Across town, David sat in his apartment, typing furiously on his laptop. He was one of the data engineers who had once consulted for Fani's team. He understood how fragile the line between tracking and surveillance could be. But he also knew the numbers, how much fraud, crime, and abuse the data system had helped prevent. "People don't get it," he muttered to himself. "They think privacy laws keep them safe. But safety also means prevention." He opened a news site and scrolled through endless comments, people arguing over who was right, who was wrong. Some praised the ruling. Others warned it would lead to chaos. David closed the screen. "They talk like it's theory," he said, "but it's real people who'll feel it." Meanwhile, Carla was walking home from her law office. She'd just finished a long evening debating the ruling with her colleagues. She respected Fani. They had met once at a conference on digital ethics. But Carla believed that good intentions didn't always make good laws. "The question isn't whether she meant well," Carla told her co-worker earlier. "It's whether we can allow a system that powerful to exist without checks." Her co-workers had nodded, though one admitted, "Still, it's hard not to feel like we're stepping backward." Carla understood that. She loved justice, but she also feared what happens when systems grow faster than ethics can follow. When she got home, she found her younger brother, Marcus, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He was applying for a job and hesitated when she entered. "They're asking me to upload all my info, driver's license, social, even tax records," he said. "Feels weird." Carla smiled softly. "That's exactly why the ruling matters. You should know where your data goes." Marcus shrugged. "But it's a good job. If I say no, they'll just pick someone else." She didn't answer. That was the heart of it. In the modern world, refusing to share information could cost you opportunities. Privacy had become a luxury. Back in her office, Fani met with her deputy, a young man named Jordan, who looked as frustrated as she felt. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Half our pending cases depend on that system." Fani rubbed her temples. We adapt. We'll have to go back to manual tracking, old-fashioned research. Jordan frowned. That'll take months. She nodded. I know. He hesitated before saying, Ma'am, people are already saying we crossed the line. Maybe it's time to rebuild trust. Fani looked up. Trust takes years. We don't have years. Crime doesn't wait for the law to feel comfortable. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Some outlets praised the court for protecting Americans from digital overreach. Others accused it of crippling innovation. Talk shows invited guests to argue about data, privacy, and power. Everyone wanted a simple answer, but none existed. Fani gave a short press statement. Her tone was measured, her words careful. Our goal was always to protect, she said. We respect the court's decision, but we'll continue finding ways to keep our communities safe. Behind her calm voice, though, she was already thinking of alternatives. Maybe smaller, local systems, partnerships with private companies, anything that could bypass the new restrictions without breaking the law. David watched her statement live. He admired her composure. He knew how much pressure she was under. In a text to Carla, he wrote, She's not the enemy. She's just trying to keep people safe. Carla replied a few minutes later, I know, but safety without limits becomes control. That's not freedom. David started to type a reply, then stopped. He couldn't argue with that. Later that week, Carla was invited to a panel discussion at a local university. The topic was privacy and power in the digital age. She spoke passionately about consent, about how easy it is for data systems to grow beyond their original purpose. The problem isn't technology, she said. It's what happens when we stop questioning how it's used. A student in the audience raised his hand. But what if questioning slows down justice? Carla paused, thinking of Fani. Then we find balance, she said. Justice without privacy is dangerous. Privacy without justice is fragile. We need both. Meanwhile, Fani sat in a late-night meeting with local officials. They were trying to decide how to move forward. We can't just give up, one official said. The public expects results, Fani nodded. Then we'll give them results, legally, carefully. But we won't stop protecting them. Her determination reignited the room. For the first time since the ruling, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way to rebuild. Slower, yes, but stronger. That same night, David and Carla met again, this time at a small diner near the courthouse. The world outside was calm, but both of them were still thinking about the storm of debate that had swept the country. Do you ever feel like no one's really right? David asked. Carla smiled. All the time, but that's what makes it worth talking about. He nodded. Maybe we need laws that can keep up with people like Fani. People who move fast but still care about doing good. Carla looked out the window. And people like you, who can see both sides. Across town, Fani finally left her office and drove through the quiet streets. The city lights reflected off her windshield. Every glowing window, every flicker of a phone screen reminded her why she'd started this work. To protect the lives behind those lights. But she also knew that protection meant earning trust again. It wasn't enough to be right in her own eyes. She had to make people believe she was right for them too. She parked near the courthouse and stepped out, breathing in the cold air. The city was still alive, still full of stories. Somewhere, someone was committing a crime she might have stopped if her system was still running. But somewhere else, someone was breathing easier, knowing the government couldn't see their every move. Both feelings were real. Both mattered. Fani looked up at the courthouse lights. She didn't see defeat anymore, just a challenge. The ruling had shut one door, but maybe it had opened another. One that forced everyone, lawmakers, data experts, citizens, to finally talk about where the line should be. And maybe, just maybe, that conversation was the real beginning. A few days after the Supreme Court ruling, the tension had shifted from shock to debate. News networks filled their schedules with experts arguing about the meaning of privacy and protection. Talk shows ran heated discussions. Hashtags trended nonstop. But when Fani Willis walked into the television studio that evening for her first interview since the decision, she wasn't thinking about politics. She was thinking about trust, how easily it broke, and how hard it was to earn back. The studio lights were blinding. The host smiled politely as she introduced Fani, calling her the face of the state's failed data initiative. Fani didn't flinch. She sat upright, calm, her voice steady. I wouldn't call it a failure, she said. We use data to prevent real crimes. People were protected because of it. The host leaned forward. But the Supreme Court said your methods violated privacy laws. Don't you think that's crossing a line? Fani met her gaze. Every law was written before the world went digital. We're trying to keep up. Technology changes faster than legislation. If we don't adapt, innocent people get hurt, the audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement. Others crossed their arms. The host pressed again. And what about citizens who feel watched? Fani didn't hesitate. They deserve answers. They deserve to know what's being done and why. But safety isn't free. Every layer of protection costs something. Time, money, or a piece of privacy. Across town, Carla watched the interview from her living room. She respected Fani's composure, but every word made her uneasy. Carla had spent years defending clients whose personal data had been used unfairly. Sometimes by corporations, sometimes by the state. She knew that good intentions didn't always stop bad outcomes. She means well, Carla whispered to herself. But once the system starts collecting, it never stops. Her phone buzzed. It was David texting her during the broadcast. She's right, though. Data saves lives. Carla typed back quickly. So does accountability. Later that week, Carla was invited to a community panel about the ruling. The small auditorium filled with students, parents, and local business owners. People wanted clarity, not legal jargon, but understanding. Carla took the microphone and began simply. Privacy isn't about secrets, she said. It's about control. Who controls your information? Who decides what's safe? A man in the front row raised his hand. If data can stop criminals, why not use it? I don't care if someone knows what groceries I buy. Carla smiled politely. That's fair, but what if the data doesn't stop there? What if one mistake labels you a threat? What if you can't fix it? The room went quiet. People started to think instead of argue. That's what Carla wanted. Not to win, but to make them question. Meanwhile, Fani's interview had gone viral. Some clips showed her as a hero standing up for innovation. Others portrayed her as a symbol of government overreach. The next morning, her office was flooded with messages, some supportive, others angry. She read a few, then shut off her phone. She'd learned long ago that the truth often got lost between headlines. Her deputy, Jordan, walked in holding a stack of reports. The city council wants to review all our data projects, he said. Fani sighed. They're scared. Everyone's scared. Should we fight it? Jordan asked. Fani shook her head. No, let them look. We have nothing to hide. Maybe transparency will calm things down. But calm was not what the media wanted. Later that week, Fani appeared again, this time on a debate-style show. Opposite her sat a technology professor known for warning about surveillance. He smiled as he greeted her, polite but sharp. Ms. Willis, do you truly believe the government should have the power to predict crimes before they happen? Fani replied firmly. I believe we should use every ethical tool available to prevent harm. He leaned forward. Ethical to you, maybe, but who defines that? You? The state? Once you open that door, how do you close it? The crowd reacted with gasps and murmurs. Fani paused before answering. We define it together, through laws, oversight, and dialogue. That's why I'm here. Across the country, clips of the exchange spread fast. Social media users took sides. Some praised her courage. Others accused her of justifying surveillance. It was no longer just a legal issue. It had become a moral one. That night, David and Carla met again, both tired from the constant noise of opinions. They sat in the same cafe where it all started. The TV muted this time. It's crazy, David said. People act like privacy and safety can't exist together. Carla stirred her tea. Maybe they can, but balance takes honesty. Too much fear and we lose trust. Too much freedom and we lose safety. David nodded slowly. You sound like Fani. Carla smiled faintly. She's not wrong about everything. I just think she forgot that power. Even good power needs limits. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. A reminder that danger still existed no matter how many debates people had. Back in her office, Fani reviewed the city council's new oversight plan. It was strict, maybe even restrictive, but she decided to cooperate fully. She called Jordan in. If this is what it takes to rebuild confidence, we'll do it, she said. I'd rather be transparent than misunderstood. Over the following weeks, Fani began hosting open forums, town halls where citizens could ask questions about her work. Some came angry, demanding explanations. Others came curious. She answered every question she could. Slowly, the hostility softened. People began to see that her goal wasn't control. It was prevention. At one event, a woman stood up and said, My mother almost lost her savings to an online scam last year. Your system stopped it. I just wanted to say thank you. The room went silent. Even Carla, watching the clip online later, felt something shift. Maybe the issue wasn't whether Fani was right or wrong. Maybe it was about learning how to do things better. Soon after, Carla herself was invited to join a new advisory group formed to design ethical guidelines for state data use. To her surprise, Fani was on the same list. When they met in person for the first time, the conversation was tense but respectful. "I guess we're on the same team now," Fani said with a small smile. Carla nodded. Different sides of the same goal: protecting people. They spent hours talking, disagreeing, brainstorming. By the end, both realized that compromise wasn't weakness, it was progress. As weeks turned into months, the public tone began to change. The debates still continued, but now they were grounded in dialogue, not outrage. Fani had learned to explain her work in ways people could understand. Carla had learned to trust that reform was possible without rejection. The media eventually moved on to new stories, but the conversation they sparked stayed alive. In classrooms, workplaces, dinner tables, people were asking smarter questions about what privacy meant and how much protection they really wanted. And one night, long after everyone had gone home, Fani sat in her office, reading over the first draft of the new data ethics charter she and Carla had helped create. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a middle ground between fear and freedom. She smiled faintly and turned off the light. Somewhere out there, someone was safer tonight. Not because of surveillance, not because of secrecy, but because people had finally learned to listen to both sides. Weeks passed, and the noise around the Supreme Court ruling began to fade. News stations moved on, hashtags cooled, and people found new topics to argue about. But beneath the quiet surface, the country was still adjusting. Rules were changing, systems were being rewritten, and everyone, from city lawyers to tech developers, was trying to figure out what the new world of data responsibility really meant. Fani Willis walked into her office early one morning, coffee in hand, the skyline glowing through her window. It was the first time in months that the air felt calm. Her old data program was gone, but something new had taken its place. A smaller, more transparent initiative built with community input and public oversight. It wasn't as powerful, but it was trusted, and that meant everything. She sat down to review the first weekly report. The numbers were modest, but progress was progress. "It's slower," said her deputy, Jordan, stepping into the room. "But it's working. People are starting to trust us again." Fani smiled. "Good. I'd rather take small, steady steps than big ones people don't believe in." Across town, Carla was finishing a presentation for the advisory board she now co-chaired with Fani. The two women, once on opposite sides, had become unlikely collaborators. Together, they were designing new state guidelines for how digital data could be used ethically in investigations. It was tough work, full of disagreement and debate, but it was honest. That afternoon, they met in the same conference room where they'd first argued months ago. Now the energy was different. Fani looked over the document. "So, you're saying every citizen has the right to see what data we have on them?" Carla nodded. "Exactly. Full transparency. If people know what's being used, they'll stop fearing the worst." Fani leaned back, thinking. "And what about emergencies? We can't always ask permission first," Carla replied. "Then we include a clause for crisis exceptions. Narrow, supervised, time-limited." "That's the balance," Fani smiled faintly. "Balance. I think we're finally getting there." As they talked, reporters began to cover their collaboration. The same media that once framed them as enemies now called them an example of how divided sides can work toward shared goals. Neither woman cared much for headlines, but they both knew the importance of perception. The public needed to see unity. The country needed hope that compromise was possible. Meanwhile, David, the data analyst who'd followed the debate from the start, watched all of it unfold online. He'd gone back to his consulting work, helping small companies manage privacy policies. One evening, he wrote a blog post titled, "Trust is the New Technology." It went viral overnight. In it, he explained that the future wasn't about choosing between safety and privacy. It was about designing systems where both could exist. "The real solution," he wrote, "isn't more power or less power, it's shared power." He quoted Fani and Carla, acknowledging that progress had come not from victory, but from understanding. The post reached thousands of readers, including Fani herself. She smiled as she read it, recognizing the same thoughtful tone she remembered from the early debates. She forwarded it to Carla with a short message. "Looks like people are starting to get it." Carla replied simply, "Finally." Weeks later, Fani stood at a community event downtown, a forum meant to explain the new ethical data use charter her office had just adopted. The crowd was mixed: students, parents, tech workers, retirees. Some still looked skeptical. But when Fani began to speak, her words carried calm and conviction. "I know many of you still have doubts," she said. "You've seen technology misused before. You've seen power abused, But this time, we're doing it differently. Every program will be reviewed publicly. Every data point collected will have a clear reason. No secrets, no shortcuts. She paused, scanning the crowd. This isn't just about laws. It's about trust. And trust isn't built overnight. It's built through transparency and accountability. When the event ended, people approached her. Not to argue, but to thank her. One man said his daughter worked in cybersecurity and felt inspired by the new approach. A teacher said her students were debating the issue in class. For the first time, Fani felt that the story was changing, not from anger to agreement, but from fear to curiosity. Later that night, she and Carla met at a small rooftop cafe overlooking the city. The wind was cool, and the noise of traffic below sounded almost peaceful. They sat in silence for a while before Carla spoke. "Do you ever think about how this started?" "One ruling changed everything," Fani nodded. "At first, I thought it destroyed everything I'd worked for. Now I see it was the push we needed. We were moving too fast without listening," Carla smiled. "And I was so focused on limits I forgot that innovation isn't the enemy. It's how we use it that matters." They laughed quietly. Two professionals who had fought fiercely but learned deeply. "We make a good team," Carla said. Fani grinned. "Don't say that too loud. Someone might think we've gone soft." They stayed there a long time, watching the city lights. Below them, the streets glowed with the quiet rhythm of life. People working, driving, scrolling, connecting. Every phone, every light, every signal carried data. The same data that once divided them was now a shared responsibility, a reminder that technology wasn't the problem. Human choices were. The next morning, the Ethical Data Charter was officially signed into state law. It was modest in scope, but revolutionary in spirit. For the first time, both privacy advocates and law enforcement agreed on a set of guiding principles. It became a model for other states to follow. Fani attended the signing ceremony in a simple black suit, standing beside Carla as cameras flashed. "This isn't the end of the conversation," she said to the reporters afterward. "It's the beginning of a better one." When the microphones turned off, Carla leaned over and said quietly, "You handled that perfectly." Fani chuckled. "I've had practice." A few weeks later, David visited one of the new public data centers, where citizens could see how information was stored and used. He watched a group of high school students taking a tour, their teacher explaining how ethics and technology were now taught together. One student raised her hand and asked, "Can people really trust the system now?" The teacher smiled. "They can trust people who work to make it better." David left the building feeling something he hadn't in a long time: hope. That night, Fani received an email from an unknown address. It was short. "I didn't believe in your program before. I still have doubts, but I see you trying. That matters." She read it twice, then smiled. Sometimes progress wasn't about changing everyone's mind. It was about earning their respect. As the city lights flickered outside her window, Fani closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The fight wasn't over. New challenges would come. Technology would evolve, laws would lag, debates would return. But now she knew how to face them, with collaboration, humility, and patience. Somewhere across town, Carla was reading her own messages, people thanking her for standing up for privacy while still working toward solutions. She realized that justice wasn't always about drawing hard lines. It was about finding common ground without losing integrity. And as the night deepened, the story that had once divided a city ended not with a verdict, but with a quiet understanding. Safety and freedom were never enemies. They were partners, learning slowly, painfully, beautifully to coexist.